to Lunch with the League. I am so impressed with how many people have come. This is a terrific way of starting the new year, and we're going to learn a lot of new things. Just to let you know, I'm Joanna Leifer. I'm the program committee chair for the New York City League of Women Voters. Every month, my program committee finds a topic and finds a speaker to discuss a social or political issue that's impacting New Yorkers. Today's topic, which is on our asylum seekers from the border states, is the topic, and we are really fortunate to have Commissioner Manuel Castro, who will speak to us. Just to let you know, we do have this every month. We've had some really good speakers lately. In September, we had Alvin Bragg, our Manhattan DA, came to speak with us. We've also had Bridget Bergen from WNYC speak to us in October about the upcoming election, and we have a lot of more topics to come. Over the COVID, whereas things stopped, we did not. We went on Zoom and we continued. But there's nothing nicer than to have people here live, to be able to see each other, discuss the topic, and to ask important questions. I'm going to turn this over to Carol Van Dusen, one of the program committee members, who is going to take over and introduce the programs and the league. Thank you.
Joanna was called for jury duty and asked me would I take over. And she was released, and she said, oh, well, you do it. So, you know my name. I am Carol Van Dusen, and I am a member of the League and of the program committee, and also a member of the Society for Ethical Culture. And the Society for Ethical Culture has allowed us to have lunch with the League every month. So as a member of the Society, as a member of the League, I'd like to thank the Society for Ethical Culture. So, before we begin, I guess we've begun, but I would like to introduce the League's co-president, Kai Rosenthal, somebody's phone just rang. Kai Rosenthal, who will tell you about additional events that will be happening with the League. So, Kai.
Hi, and welcome. It's great to see such a good turnout. And Happy New Year. I think you can say that until the end of January, right? So I wanted to tell you about our upcoming awards breakfast. It's a tribute, and it's on March 16th, where we are going to honor 3 New York women who are using their businesses to promote and support voting and voter turnout. So just to let you know who they are, yes, exactly, we're very enthusiastic as well. Kaya Clark, who is the CEO of the New York Liberty basketball team. Sarah LaFleur, founder and CEO of LaFleur Fashion Company. And Celia Moreno, who is the social impact lead with Lyft, the ride-hailing app. So we're honoring all 3 of these women at a breakfast on March 16th. We urge you to buy your tickets soon because the event typically sells out. You can find all the details on our website, lwvnyc.org, or you can ask one of the League members and we'll be happy to help you with details or tickets or purchasing tickets. In addition, as part of our breakfast, we'll be hosting a silent auction for 2 weeks leading up to the event. And we welcome any items or services that you'd like to offer for auction. So I don't know if any of you have small businesses or professional services that you would like to donate time or items to the League for us to auction to raise money for the League. And again, if you want to, if you have something you want to talk to one of us, we'd be happy to talk to you after the presentation today. And I guess lastly, I just want to introduce Michael Price, who is a co-chair of our newly formed Transportation Committee. And if you are interested in serving, Michael raised his hand in the back of the room. If you are interested in transportation in New York City, so that means subways, buses, less cars, more cars, bikes, all of that, please introduce yourself to Michael and he'll make sure you're invited to the next meeting. And I think with that, I just want to say thank you again to the Society for Ethical Culture for hosting us every month, and thank you to the program committee. I'm going to turn it back to Carol.
We're a friendly group. Much of the news today concerns the influx of asylum seekers from several of the countries entering the southern border, and in turn, coming to New York City. To help us understanding what the city is doing and what we as individuals can do to help, we have Manuel Castro, Commissioner for the Mayor's Office of Immigration Affairs. When I asked Mayor Castro's assistant, Shana, how he would like the meeting to run, what term would he use, and he used the term like a fireside chat. So we don't have the fire, fortunately, but we have the chair, and we have the platform, and we have a lavalier mic, which he might need some help getting on, or have you done it a lot? And we will begin. But before that, I would like to give a little bit of Commissioner Castro's background, because I think it's extremely relevant. He came to the country from Mexico at the age of 5 to join his father. He, like many children, came here and remained undocumented. He alone, with others, started the DACA movement, which remains unsolved to this day. This experience inspired Mr. Castro to make a difference for the immigrant community, where he served as the executive director of New Immigrant Community Empowerment, better known as NYC, as opposed to ICE. Which is a Queens-based organization working to create a world where immigrants can live and work with justice, dignity, and respect. Under Manuel's leadership, NYC developed a set of highly impactful and innovative programs and services aimed at strengthening the individual and collective capacities of immigrant workers particularly those in the informal economy, like day laborers and domestic workers. A year ago, Manuel was appointed by Mayor Eric Adams as a commissioner of the NYC Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, also known as, this is new for us, MOIA. He is responsible for running a city agency dedicated to supporting over 3.2 million immigrant New Yorkers. MOIA works to ensure immigrants' access to services in partnership with agencies across the city, as well as community partners. The mayor could not have picked a more empathetic and knowledgeable commissioner. With that, I welcome Commissioner Manuel Castro. Can you put that on? Yeah? And you can see the fire in front of you. And everybody's ready to chat. If that does help, can you
Can you hear me now? Is that better? Is that better? Let's see. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay. It's in and out, right? Oh, that's better. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? No? I can use the podium. It's fine.
use the podium because that's loud. Okay. Blow out the fire.
I think Shaina may have said fireside chat because I wanted to make sure this was a conversation, less so than a presentation. I do a lot of these, and I find that for many people, I think they're just getting to know the office that I run. And there's a lot of questions about what's going on with asylum seekers and in general with the immigrant community in New York, and I'd like to answer as many questions as possible. So I'll give introductory remarks, and then we can just have a conversation because I know there's just a lot of questions. There's also a lot of coverage of this issue in the press, to mix back in the coverage. I wish, we had more time to tell the story, but we are, busy supporting people as they arrive. And so part of what I'm doing this year is to make sure that New Yorkers are aware of what we're doing and how they can support. But first, thank you, Carol, for that introduction. For me, it's just been very meaningful to be able to serve as commissioner in this time. As Carol mentioned, I myself arrived to New York City when I was 5 years old. I crossed the Mexico-U.S. border with my mother as undocumented immigrant. So I had that experience of having to cross the border, having to be smuggled in, and then transported here to New York, where my father was already living and working. And then having grown up undocumented, and as Carol mentioned, having been part of the founding of the Dreamer movement that later became DACA movement, along with other dreamers like Cesar Vargas, who's here today. Cesar is now our legal counsel at the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs. Cesar was actually the first dreamer admitted to the bar in the state of New York. So very, very big accomplishment. And this is I guess the stage we're in with dreamers. So many of us have fought for decades now, and we're now in these roles that allow us to support communities that are still arriving. And it was an unprecedented moment when we learned that asylum seekers or people crossing the border were arriving to New York City, in that it had to do with Governor Abbott chartering buses, sending them from the state of Texas to first Washington, D.C., and then New York City. And so perhaps I'll share a few insights, maybe 3 insights about what I've seen, and perhaps, that can be the start of a conversation. A few observations that I think are important for New Yorkers to know. The first of which is how unprecedented it is for this number of asylum seekers to arrive in such short period of time. So in terms of numbers, we've welcomed just ourselves, our city agencies, 38,700 asylum seekers in about 6 months. And this is data we have because these are asylum seekers that arrived at Port Authority or at our shelter system. So we're at 38,700, and the number continues. Just last week, we welcomed about 1,600 new asylum seekers. And this is not, in previous waves, you had very specific sort of demographics. In recent times, in 2017, we welcomed about 3,000 unaccompanied minors. Some of you might remember it was in the news. Unaccompanied minors were being flown into the state of New York, and New York City had to respond because these were minors that needed shelter and so on. But we're talking about unprecedented numbers here. And even going back to the time of Ellis Island and that wave of migrants, they were arriving to New York at Ellis Island, a federally managed, facility. This is nothing like it. In fact, that time, people were able to access citizenship and work permits and so on. I mean, I don't think work permits existed as they exist today, but it was a very different time when it came to arriving immigrants and their settlement in New York City. So 6 months in, 38,700 people. We're still learning. We're still trying to figure this out. The figure that really stands out to me, and that was just updated this morning by our deputy mayor at another function we were in, we have welcomed over 12,000 children to New York City that came with the asylum seekers arriving to New York. It's 12,000 children that we are currently enrolling or have already enrolled into our school system. And most of them, in fact, are living in our shelters. And the kind of impact, that can have on a child's life when not only have they just crossed jungles and deserts and borders, now they arrive in New York City and they have to live in a shelter. And they have to be placed in schools that might not be ready. How could we have been ready to serve children with that level of trauma and need? So this is what we're grappling with. Our team at city government to try and figure out as a city. And I think the coverage has been ongoing. Like I said, I don't really have a sense of what it is because there's so much of it and I'm in the middle of it. But to my mind, there's just a lot of needs, but a lot of people that are working to meet those needs that I think need to be highlighted. Just the teachers and the parent coordinators alone and the schools that are doing everything possible to support these children and families. The second insight or observation is just the level of infrastructure that we've been able to build. Now, as Carol mentioned, I previously ran a nonprofit, and I worked with newly arrived immigrants and come from that world. And the mayor wanted to have someone with direct experience, not only lived experience, but having supported this community. But this is totally unprecedented, right? My office, it's a smaller agency. compared to the larger ones, suddenly was placed in the middle of this crisis. And we had to figure out how to best welcome these many thousands of asylum seekers, and working with other city agencies, homeless services, Department of Social Services, health and hospitals, DOE, and so on. We managed, to open 70 hotels dedicated to asylum seekers located across New York City. Now, those hotels, for many reasons, the addresses are private, and so a lot of people don't know where they're located, and that's because we don't want, of course, the media circus comes with that, and we want to make sure asylum seekers have privacy. But that's 70 hotels dedicated just for asylum seekers across the 5 boroughs. Some communities obviously pushed back, right, on having these hotels be used as shelters. But when asylum seekers began to arrive and they started to use our regular shelter system, I imagined, well, maybe we should have a hotel just for asylum seekers. We're now at 71 hotels in just 6 months. In addition to that, because we had to, in order to help ease the strain on our shelter system, we opened what we're calling humanitarian relief and recovery centers. We lease these mega hotels. You may have heard of them. One of them is the Row Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. We have a number of them in this, Midtown general area. This is the first point of entry. Now, as asylum seekers arrive at Port Authority or in flights now, this is where they arrive at these sort of mega hotels. They register and they get immediate services there, because we have to figure out what are their, let's say if they have any medical needs. Because when we first started to welcome asylum seekers, many of them had been on like 3-4 month journeys. And of course, some of them with chronic illnesses didn't have medication. They were arriving in really terrible circumstances. So, mentally, physically, everything you can imagine after having gone through such journey. So we needed to set up a facility. You may have heard this. We had a HERC, this is the short name, at Randall's Island, where we built a huge facility to be able to welcome asylum seekers. Well, we closed that down, and we have these big hotels that replaced that facility. But we're at capacity, frankly. We filled up these massive hotels, and people continue to come. But one thing that I still get chills when I visit, right? The level of activity happening around these hotels to support asylum seekers. And we have thousands of people in these hotels, and children. I last visited the Row right at school dismissal, and I was able to see the children coming back from school, and they all get snacks, and we're trying to figure out how to better support the children who, might need like after school programs or something to do after school, right? And some more recreational activities. But I'm in awe, honestly, that, that we were able to stand this up. But now how to sustain it is a difficult question, because as you may have read in the press, we have gotten little support from the state and federal government. So far, New York City has covered all costs, and the National Guard is helping at Port Authority now, but this has been something that the city has led on, and most recently the mayor has, been more vocal about it, because we have been sort of carrying the load here, and we're still waiting for additional support, especially if we continue to see more people arrive, because there's only so much hotel space, and the needs are tremendous, especially for people who have gone through so much trauma. And then finally, I think our focus is really responding to the humanitarian crisis and helping people as they arrive and making sure they have their basic needs met. But I think the politics are also really difficult. Yes, locally, of course, you probably follow those politics, but it's unprecedented for a border state governor to send so many people to New York or to Washington, D.C. and now Chicago, sanctuary cities, as they say, in order to make a political statement, in order to push the envelope on an issue. It's unprecedented that many of the asylum seekers did not want to come to New York, in fact, but it was the only free bus or the free option for them to leave the border, or to leave Texas. Many of them initially wanted to reconnect with their communities. As you can probably remember, most of the asylum seekers were from Venezuela at that point, in the early months. The biggest community of Venezuelans in the United States is in Florida, and so that's where they wanted to go. That option was not provided to them, so they ended up in New York and DC, and now they are dispersed. But it's unprecedented that would happen, and so the question is, how is that going to impact decisions moving forward, right? Will this continue to be used as a tactic by these sort of political actors? And what does that mean for New York City, places like New York, who are more welcoming cities and spaces? And how would that impact the larger question of immigration and immigrants, not just in this country but elsewhere? It's been interesting in the last few months. Consul generals of other countries have reached out to learn more about what we're doing and how we're meeting the situation, because the same politics exists around migrants in other parts of the country. And of course, the fear is that extremists on one side will use migrants in such a way, to punish or to make political statements within their own country. So it's been fascinating how much attention has been placed on New York in our response, which is why it's been so important for us to do as much as we do, even though sometimes it feels like it's not enough. But it's been an incredible privilege for me to be able to do this as commissioner, to work alongside other people who might not have been experts on migration, and now Deputy Mayor Ann Williams Tyson, for instance, who is someone who comes from education, healthcare. She's the Deputy Mayor of Health and Human Services, is leading the way and has had to learn a lot within the last 6 months about immigrants and migration. I've been working closely with her, and now it's one of the top priorities for city government, because we know this is important, not just for New York, but how we talk about migrants and welcoming migrants nationally and perhaps the world. So I'll leave it at that. If you have any questions, I'm here for it. Thank you.
I'm just checking to make sure this is on. Is it on? Okay.
What is the are you getting money from the federal government, and what is the obligation of the federal government? And have there been other times when the federal government, say in Florida, or has contributed funds to help settle people?
So I was surprised to learn that, much like how nonprofits often receive funding by reimbursement, which makes it really difficult to run a nonprofit. The same thing for the city government. We receive funds from the federal government by reimbursement, which can take forever to come. And so far, we've received very little. I think it's like $8 million. And we spent close to $1 billion, we're pushing, and I know our congressional delegation has done a great job. We work closely with Senator Schumer and just generally speaking, our congressional delegation. But things are really slow, and this situation has not been slow to develop. And so we keep insisting that the federal government could be doing more. That said, we are in constant communication with the White House, and I think initially there was a lot of confusion because Governor Abbott chose to send people here whose everyone that's admitted into the country has indicates their final destination, and they have to show up to immigration court based on the documents that they're given. So a lot of people arrived to New York who had not indicated New York as their final destination. So one of the things that we initially did is help them change their addresses. But the federal government didn't really have an accurate sense of this. And so we understand that the federal government has to get up to speed. And in previous, I guess, waves and situations like these, they've stepped up, but so far we are still waiting. And we're hopeful. But I think this speaks to the unprecedented nature of this. No one expected that Governor Abbott would cross that line, and he has. And now, what does that mean, right, for the future of immigration politics? And I mean, it's telling that the president visited the border just this past weekend after resisting not even talking about it for months, because the stance from the federal government was that there's no border crisis, because this was sort of a framing that comes from usually immigration restrictionists, right? And now he had to go to the border because it clearly has become a crisis.
Hi, first of all, thank you. I'm a regular volunteer at the Port Authority, meeting the buses.
Oh, great.
And there are two nonprofits you didn't mention, Team TLC and artists, activists, and athletes. And what happens is when the buses arrive, we meet them. And then we give them food, we give them clothes, and then we turn them over to the National Guard, who have been great, by the way. But they continue to come back, because when they go to the hotels, there's no food, there's no clothes. So they're just hanging out at the Port Authority, and we're there 7 days a week with no funding whatsoever. Yes, so the question is, what can we do to work with you? Because they want to kick everybody out of the Port Authority. They don't want that to be an operation for receiving immigrants. So what can we all do to work together to meet their needs as they come in? They came in Sunday night. I got an email about a bus coming in, and we were called to go meet them.
So, one of the biggest challenges, I would say, is some of the coordination between the groups on the ground and the different government entities that are now working on this. So Port Authority is a state-managed facility. In fact, Port Authority is a New York, New Jersey partnership. So as you can imagine, the politics around that, right? And then New York City having to step in and be able to have access to that. Initially, what I did myself is negotiate with the state to be able to allow our staff and our teams to respond to Port Authority. Eventually, we had to allow the state to step in and manage that part of the operations. But then there are volunteer groups, right, that are also plugged in. And it's not just, I usually don't mention the volunteer groups because there's now many. We have a list of like 800 volunteer groups that are not just at Port Authority, right, but that are volunteering all over the city. We mentioned to some of the volunteer groups like Team TLC, I don't want to get into the politics here, but there's a way to collaborate with city agencies, and there was an article that actually we were just talking about how at one of our Herc hotels, there's a lot of food that is not consumed. We have a tremendous amount of food at our Herc hotels, and then we hear from a nonprofit that there's no food once they arrive. So that there's a lack of communications, clear communications there. But when the nonprofit chooses to go to the press and sensationalize this, and then the press covers it, right? Then I think the impact is misinformation to the community that needs the support, because then they say, well, why go to the Herc if there's no resources or no food? So it's so important. I talked to a lot of nonprofits and activists. Having ran a nonprofit myself and been an activist, it's so important to get the right information and get to the right people, and not allow the press, frankly, or social media to spread misinformation. And a I'll leave it at that. I mean, again, I'm really grateful about what volunteer groups and nonprofits are doing across New York City. But I think it is also very, it's a challenge when press continues to, to spread information without verifying. I've had to intervene with a lot of, articles and reporters and say, did you actually take the additional step to confirm this information? And many have not, which is, to me, it's disappointing, right? And this is often, well-respected press. Actually, a few weeks ago, when there was talk about there being no food at one of our hotels, I happened to have visited that hotel and taken pictures of, of our facility. And I had to post this online, and I said, hey, there's some disconnect there, right? I'm not going to post pictures of people eating, right, or asylum seekers to respect their privacy. But again, it's so important to verify this information before it goes out. Team TLC, just so you know, they're not their own nonprofit. They're a volunteer group. Again, they put in a lot of time and energy. And, again, everyone that supports, I'm grateful for. But there's also a lot of strain when it's a nonprofit, it's a volunteer situation. And what we have done is established sort of more consistent sort of way to help people, because it's 38,000 plus people, 38,700 plus people that need to serve, that need shelter, that need education, health services, and so on. So I'll leave it there. I don't know if you guys. So if you, I'll invite my members of our team to also answer any questions that or fill in the gaps if I'm missing anything. Oh, there's a.
We have a question over here.
Oh.
Thank you. What is New York City doing, or is New York City working with the federal government to relocate people to their intended addresses and their intended communities? And where are these removal proceedings? Because I assume the removal proceedings have been filed. Where are they being filed?
Do you mean removal proceedings by ICE, by immigration?
Given that people are supposed to go to court,
yes.
So are those proceedings being filed in New York now? And why is the federal government working with New York City to get those cases filed in the locations where the immigrants' intended address is supposed to be?
Yeah, well, that is a kind of a complex question, because while we are stepping in to close the gap where they exist, we have strict limitations on how we work with the federal government when it comes to immigration enforcement. And this is for a variety of reasons, right? We don't want our immigrant communities to be afraid of coming forward for help if they think we're actively collaborating with immigration enforcement agencies. And so you probably heard or read some reporting where people are getting orders of removal for not showing up to their appointments, which is quite alarming to us as well. And frankly, there's a lot going on, right, at 26 Federal Plaza, which is our main immigration court. There's lines out the door, there's confusion. Often there was a report, I think, a few weeks ago, or days ago, they've set up 2 lines, right, and people are getting on the wrong line, which could lead to, missed appointments. Again, we step in an unlimited basis to inform people about the process and about their rights, but we have to limit our collaboration when it comes to immigration enforcement, and we have to be clear about that. I just recorded a video, I suppose, to be able to distribute to these many thousands of people, because at this point, there's so many people here that need legal services and information that it's been hard to reach all of them. So we're trying to reach all of them as best we can to let them know what their options are and the consequences. Unfortunately, like I said earlier, the federal government or the Border Patrol agents and the customs have allowed people in with a variety of addresses, right? So Catholic Charities, for instance, was listed as home addresses or final destination addresses for about 2,000 people here in New York. And so people showed up from the border to Catholic Charities, and Catholic Charities didn't know what to do. You know, so they began to support them. But obviously those who didn't identify or those who showed up and didn't know what to do, yes, the fear is, and I expressed this on our last call with the White House, our fear is that months from now we'll see a lot of people with orders of removal, deportation. And so then our work will have to evolve to support those people who are at risk of deportation. And obviously we don't want immigration enforcement to show up to our shelters and so on. Cesar's our legal counsel, so he'll be able to answer a little more in detail.
Follow up that question. Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you for that question. And just to echo with the Commissioner and adding specific instances in the responsibility of the federal government as well as the city's effort to ensure that there is a level of information that's getting to asylum seekers. So to the question of the federal government, right now the federal government is in the absolute sphere of dealing and managing immigration, both in obviously enforcement at the border, but also in the operations to make sure that people are getting these notices and have the due process for a case in immigration court. Many of them are seeking asylum. Many of them have an opportunity to plead their case within a one year time frame. But in the city of New York, we are making an effort to ensure that when it comes to deportation removal orders, the DSS shelter system is trying to very, very proactive to ensure that asylum seekers get the notifications that they should be getting from the federal government. They don't have private residences, but they do have the shelter address, and DSS and the shelter systems and staff are making sure that people are getting their mail of any upcoming appointments, interviews, ICE check-ins. So DSS is trying to do its best. Of course, some people are leaving the shelter. Some people are obviously moving from shelter to shelter. So, you know, there's definitely obviously the challenge of what the city of New York trying to do to ensure that people getting the notices. In addition, we've been in communication with the federal government. We have been in constant communication with Senator Gillibrand's office, Senator Schumer's office, to ensure that when people are going and doing the ICE check-ins at 26 Federal Plaza, that there's a level of respect for the humanity. Right now, people are camping outside 26 Federal Plaza the night before, and sometimes in these weathers. And as you all saw probably 2 weeks ago with this frigid weather, people are going there. So the city of New York is echoing our call for the federal government to step in, both in terms of making sure that there's a resettlement program, making sure people have their due process, and making sure that when people are checking with either immigration court or immigration customs enforcement, that there is a streamlined process. And they have, in instances, tried to do it. After pressure from the city of New York, they did launch an online check-in system where they could do it via online. But even then, right, the volume is increasing every day in the city of New York. But the city of New York is definitely trying to ensure that we are appealing to our federal partners to work with us, just as we have been pleading with our state partners for access, for opportunity, for resources at Port Authority to make sure that the city of New York can get the support they need. Yeah, and that's a challenge. So right now, because of the volume that people are getting their notices to appear, which is an immigration court check-in, or their notice to report, which is going to ICE just to get a sense of where this person is, and obviously people have in different states. the federal government has told us that they acknowledge it, that they are obviously being a little bit more flexible, considering that people are being bused sometimes against their will to other states. But we have been in contact, like myself, the mayor was able to send a team out to the border, and I was part of that delegation, and we were able to speak with local ICE offices out there, and they're acknowledging even that they're not going to be rigid in their enforcement of getting people who have to report in Denver, Boston, you name it, all the states. But ultimately, we obviously not showing up to your court appointments or immigration check-ins can have consequences, particularly if you're trying to make a case for asylum. So this is another aspect that we've been talking with the federal government, Immigration Customs Enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security, particularly the umbrella agency overseeing ICE, overseeing Border Patrol, overseeing the United States Citizenship Immigration Services, to ensure that people are not penalized. In other words, we just had a case where a family, our communications director, Shaina, brought up a case where a family, the parents got a notice to appear, meaning that they got an appointment with immigration court to make their case before a judge, but the daughter, 14-year-old daughter, got a warrant for her arrest. And it's so inconsistent. And they're making so many of these mistakes at the border when they're processing people. So one of the things that the commission has been leading on is making sure that we are spearheading legal orientation, information sessions, so people can understand basic but very critical documents. Like, some people are getting very different information, very different documents that, frankly, right now it has been very haphazard. And as the commission said, Catholic Charities, like, pretty much ICE and immigration are pretty much saying to people, you're gonna represent them, but the lawyers don't even know who their client is, obviously making the process much more difficult for the person to get representation.
Yes. First, I want to thank you for the efforts that your office is making. It's such a challenge. I really do understand that. Having done some volunteer work, I also know that undocumented immigrants have great difficulty finding reputable, affordable legal services when they're filling out their asylum applications. And I'm wondering what, if anything, your office can do to address that very serious problem.
Yes, and I didn't mention that over the last couple of months, we've issued a number of contracts out to several different nonprofits working with asylum seekers across New York City in all 5 boroughs. One of the major contracts went to Catholic Charities to operate what we call a navigation center, which we set up at the Red Cross nearby, actually, on here in Midtown. And so we leased 2 of the Red Cross's floors, and we've set up a whole system of support for asylum seekers. So we have any instances where, for instance, people can't find the support that they need after leaving Port Authority or at the shelters. They can walk in to this navigation center, and Catholic Charities staff and city staff will support them with both their address changes and with basic information on what the process looks like for asylum cases. That said, because so many people have arrived in such short notice, even if we had all the funds to be able to, cover legal services free of cost for all of them, we wouldn't even have the staff, the legal staff, to be able to do so. Because these are what are known as complex cases. These are not DACA applications or citizenship applications. These are very difficult cases to manage. Often, private practitioners are actually careful as to which ones they choose to represent, which cases they choose to take on, because they're really complicated and they're costly. Just the time that it takes to file these applications and then the follow-up. So what we're doing now is we issued, I think it was $5 million in contracts, or about to. We announced the $5 million to pay for pro se clinics, so to train volunteers, pair them with legal service providers to then operate these big clinics where asylum seekers will be able to at least sit down with someone, a pro bono lawyer, law student, you know, people who have been trained to support them through the first part of submitting an application, and just generally understanding what the process looks like. And so my hope is that in the coming months, we're going to start seeing these clinics pop up all over the city. And again, we have 70 hotels located all across the city, as far south as the South Shore in Staten Island. You know, we're, you know, asylum seekers right at the moment are everywhere, and so we're trying to spread our resources so that we can get to the people who are really having a hard time finding. And so we know that this is a major, major issue. And, you know, please do stay in touch with us, because we will need a lot of support in terms of volunteers and people who might, you know, want to sit down with an asylum seeker, a family, for a couple of weeks to help them put together an application.
I'm curious about these 70 hotels.
Mm-hmm.
Are all of these empty, or are some of them still partially occupied by guests? And if they are still functioning as hotels, are we having to pay daily rates for the immigrants?
So we have special rates with the hotels. I mean, I don't, you know, I don't oversee that part of the process. So the regular shelter hotels are managed by the Department of Social Services, Homeless Services. What we call HERCs, the mega hotels, are managed by the health and hospitals. And that's because they have a lot of experience managing those hotels, because as some of you may remember, that during COVID, we had to house a lot of people in hotels. And so, you know, obviously we have our special rate. They're all negotiated. This is not as was reported by the New York Post some time ago. You know, it was tough during the holiday season, because a lot of hotels, I mean, they're booked, right, months out. So we had to find hotels all over the city, wherever they might be. There was a lot of space, because during COVID, a lot of hotels were basically left vacant. So they had to, you know, they had to be appropriately furnished and so on, and prepared. I spent time in all of the HERC hotels, the major ones, and these are like the big fancy ones with the lobbies, and it's just kind of surreal because they have all the space, and there's a lot of migrants, and some initially were shared, right, again, because we just had to find the space in the rooms wherever possible. But we do our best to have like a cafeteria space and a space for people to get services and so on. And again, once the families are registered and they're settled into the hotels, we work with them. I think there was a question on resettlement that I didn't answer. We give them as much time as they need to come up with a plan or their own, you know, thinking about where they want to live and where they want to resettle. Many families are starting to realize that it's quite expensive to be here. And so they came here because that was their only choice. And when Cesar went to the border, I mean, we had a chance to see this for ourselves. They were basically told, here's a free bus, and everything else you have to pay your way out of the border, right? And so they were essentially coerced to come to New York. So they end up here, and they realized they don't have work permits, they don't have, you know, anything in place for them to even be able to, you know, find housing or work. So a lot of them feel stuck, but some have been choosing to relocate once they reconnect with a family member who might say, well, come live with us in Florida or wherever it might be. And we do have a program that we help. We help people with the reticketing. Again, not at Port Authority, because that was like some confusion. We try and get people an intake and services at the HERCs, and that's where people can then access those services. I think there was.
Gladys has a question longer.
Thank you. I've learned a lot, but I still have one question.
Sure.
We spoke about the city, about the federal government, about the asylum seekers. How do we educate a divisive public?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's been one of the most challenging parts in my role, because we're trying to figure out sort of how to manage the sort of like large influx of people with a lot of needs, right? But at the same time, there's just a lot of media in a lot of stories out there that cause confusion on both sides. The pro-immigrant advocates, they're like, you're not doing enough, right? And then on the other side of the spectrum is like, we need to close our borders to New York City, And so there's a lot of that. And we get a lot of questions, a lot of report. I'm speaking with the Times after this, and I'm making an attempt to sort of clarify and be able to educate the general public a little more about what we're doing. We're not, the services that people are receiving, they're the basics, right, that we can be doing. We won't have people sleeping in the streets, families and children. I mean, the very least we can do is provide them some kind of shelter, right? We are a right to shelter state, so we have to do so. But because the press or people hear that we have these hotels, they imagine, that they're staying in 5-star, the Plaza, yeah. And then, like the food situation has been challenging because, as you were mentioning, right, there was an article a few days ago about how much food is being tossed out because it's not being consumed, and that's partly because during the day, asylum seekers, of course, go out, right, and they go look for work or do their and so during lunchtime, that food is not consumed, right? So then we hear reports that there's no food. It's a really confusing moment, right? Because everyone's just talking across each other. But yeah, the more people arrive, the more compassion fatigue we're seeing. The more people are saying, how much more can we take? And it's tricky, right? Because this is why we've been more vocal about the federal government to do more, because you do feel the strain when the city's covering everything and our federal partners are not being as proactive as we have been.
Thank you. We're only going to have a couple of more questions, partly because I know that you have other places to go. Also, I wanted to, before we go on, I'd like to, you said there's a way of contacting your department if anybody wants questions. Maybe you could give that out. There's a sheet of paper on everybody's table, and maybe if you could write down the information, somebody there, and then everybody else can photograph it. Also, if you could stay for a few minutes for additional questions and for photos afterwards.
Yeah.
Do you have time to do that? Also, if you have even more time, you can tell us what we might, as a league, might be able to do to assist you in your problems. Okay?
Yeah. Can I answer those questions real brief? Yeah. Because maybe we can do this as we answer questions. So we have two hotlines. One is our general information hotline at our office, the Mayor's Office of Immigrant Affairs, and the other is our legal services hotline. So if you come across someone who has a general question, how do I sign up for healthcare? You can call our general hotline, and someone will support you, help that person navigate the system, or you can put them directly in touch with us. Our hotline has access to over 200 languages. So if the operator does not speak the language, we have access to a technology that allows us to speak with, whoever, needs language access. Immigration legal hotline will answer basic questions and will connect that person to one of our legal service providers, whether it's Catholic Charities, NYC, and so on. So we have those two hotlines available for the general public. Then online we have our website, we set up a dedicated website for asylum seeker support, and you'll find a list of some of the nonprofits, not all of them, but some of the nonprofits that are supporting asylum seekers. Not every nonprofit likes to be listed because, you know, they don't have the capacity to you know, support everyone that comes to them, but we have some listed. And in fact, you know, those are the groups that, you know, we'd love to connect you to, right? Because they're doing tremendous work. Because again, one thing is like the reception, welcoming people at Port Authority. Another is like everything else that happens. And unfortunately, the biggest strain has been on like the children's services, because, you know, it's just difficult to service so many children at 12,000. And I'm looking to do more in that area.
So my question, first of all, it sounds overwhelming, no question about it. But going forward, do you expect they're going to stop sending these people? Or what do you know? Or do you get any heads up in advance? Or what can we know or do about that?
Well, because of the politics, Governor Abbott's office does not coordinate with New York City. We just receive the buses. They coordinate more with, like, you know, Port Authority, and they know a little more. We don't know. We don't know frankly, we don't know what to expect, you know, and you may have read the state of Colorado was going to start sending buses, and we had to say, hey, you know, like, we're trying our best here, and so let's share, right, the responsibility. State of Colorado, you know, tends to be more welcoming, so we're now coordinating with them to say, hey, to say, hey, look, we want to help you, right? Help asylum seekers, and so it makes no sense to send people here if they don't have anywhere. I mean, we'll provide shelter, but again, that's just like the basics. But we don't know, to be honest. As some of you might be aware, the Title 42 is still in the Supreme Court. Once that's decided, we'll know the scale of this. But so far, there's only so much hotel space. We're looking for faith-based groups to also help house people, but we don't have many options left. Yeah. And if you want the numbers, the general hotline is 212-788-7654. And we can give you the numbers, Carol, as well. Yeah, you can email them out. Yeah.
I had a question as a child of refugees myself. And one of the things that happened during the Second World War was that there were networks of people across the country trying to help people get out of New York, which my family did. Mm. So I wonder, is there anybody really trying to make connections to other places so that people can find possible places of employment and places to live that are less expensive and less crowded? But it would seem to me that would be something that would be helpful. I have found letters of people from across the country, Fresno, California, Massachusetts, and people trying to help place people. So yeah. I think that it's not as if you don't have enough to do. And I'm very impressed by everything that you're doing, and I'm very, very grateful
Thank you.
To know that there are people working at this level. But it just seems to me that that's a place where it might be able to get some relief. It might not be quick, but...
Yeah, no, this is one of the things that we've asked the federal government to do better, which is they call it decompression strategy, decompressing from the border out to different states and localities. And I mean, every chance I get, you know, speaking with our federal partners, I'm like, what's the plan? If you leave this up to Governor Abbott, he'll continue to do the same. You need to step in and fly people to different locations, bus people to different locations, so that this is spread out and not concentrated. I mean, we're working closely with Chicago, and I love our partners there. They're having a hard time, and they've only welcomed 4,000 people, you know. And so you imagine, like, you know, I think in the city, we've mobilized, you know, we had, you know, I think a lot of things in place that allowed us to scale up, but yeah, I think a lot of other cities and states can do their share as well. I mean, this is a humanitarian crisis, right? And so it should be addressed like a humanitarian issue, not like the everyday immigration situation that exists.
We have one quick question. She promises it's quick, and then we're just going to have to stop. If you could stay for a little while, we really appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks so much. I just was wondering, when you're mentioning numbers, you're saying 38,000. Is that, first of all, how does that affect the homeless population for the city itself when we're quantifying that and we're talking about shelters? And then also, what is that in context? Like, what other immigrants are coming in? You know, like there's Ukrainian immigrants that are coming in. That's also a bit of a crisis, or was at one point. So just in general, like if you could give it a little more context, like that 38,000 is just really a portion of what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Correct? Yeah. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, great point. And again, this is what I'm out here to talk more about it. You know, we've been busy with so many. So today, this marks the first year anniversary of the Bronx fire, where 17 people died from, you know, West Africa, immigrants from West Africa. My first day on the job, I was appointed, and they were like, "Can you start Monday?" And I was like, "Sure." And I arrived, and I had to go up to the Bronx to respond to that, because a lot of the impacted families were Wolof speakers, and we had to figure out language access. And so that's what my office usually does, respond to like those types of crises locally. And then the invasion of Ukraine happens, and we mobilized quickly, and we announced a $2 million investment for community groups to welcome refugees, expected refugees from Ukraine in the region. And so far, 10,000 people have applied to relocate to New York, and we're working to relocate families here. So that was like one of the initial crises that we stepped into. And then at the same time, asylum seekers started to arrive. Many of you may have been following the crisis in Haiti. And so a lot of Haitian migrants and refugees started to arrive as well through the border. And that's something that we also announced an initiative, and we funded a lot of the Haitian-led organizations to support those people relocating to New York. So there's a lot going on in the background. And obviously the housing crisis is an ongoing thing, the shelter, the homeless in the trains, you know, so it's been a tremendous year. And yeah, I'm out here engaging, you know, to tell the story a little more and say that, like, I'm particularly proud to be a New Yorker because of what we've done, you know, and I know there's compassion fatigue, and sometimes, you know, we think, you know, how much more can we do? And I just want to make sure that we're sharing that story, that New York has done a lot and we should be proud of it, and need to continue to show that we can set an example, because again, folks are watching what we're doing, you know, and places in other parts in the world who are dealing with asylum seekers and migrants are learning from all this. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. This is a pleasure. We've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, sure.
We're going to have some pictures taken, and if you have a couple of questions, I'm sure you can come up and ask.
Yeah.